Hello, and thank you for joining us to talk more on Monday. This podcast was started to give a voice to Moore's mission of making opportunities reachable for everyone, and continues today as a way for us to share the mic with like-minded individuals with their own stories to share. Talking More has become our channel for history, mindsets, information you need, and featuring our interns who are learning how to share their voice. Join us on Patreon for our Masterclass with More, hosted by Bria Bradley, as she deep dives with experts on a host of topics key to building your business and legacy. You'll find our founder content hosted by our founder Ariana as part of our Masterclass, where business owners share lessons they've learned while in business. Today we'll be learning about how the vitality of metropolitan economies in the Midwest can be profoundly enhanced by the deliberate and strategic support of Asian-owned businesses. This sector represents a dynamic and often underappreciated engine of economic and financial growth, whose significant and multifaceted impact merits thorough explanation and sustained investment. We have two leaders joining us today with an economic and a nonprofit lens. Ephraim Palro alongside historical expert Kelsey Green. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
I'm so happy to have you both and get to talk to you about this really interesting topic and dive into both of your expertise. But before we get into that, let me introduce you both. Ephraim Palro, MSCID, is a dedicated community leader and nonprofit professional, currently serving as a lead for the Rural Local Initiative Support Corporation, LISC, Business Development Organization Network. Based in Indianapolis, he is a recognized advocate for inclusive community development, earning honors such as the Indianapolis Business Journal's 20 in their 20s, and being named a finalist for the 2024 Elevate Nonprofit Employee of the Year. Beyond his professional role, Ephraim holds several leadership positions on various boards, including the Immigrant Welcome Center and the Asian Pacific American Public Affairs Association, APAPA, where he focuses on civic engagement, health equity, and cultural preservation. An alumnus of Andrews University with international experience in humanitarian work, he combines a global perspective with a deep commitment to transforming local communities through strategic collaboration and advocacy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And on the other side of the couch, we have Kelsey Green, who is an accomplished public historian and researcher specializing in Asian American and transnational history, with a particular focus on the historical landscape of Indiana and the Midwest. Currently affiliated with the Anderson Public Library and pursuing advanced studies at the University of Indianapolis, her work centers on uncovering understudied narratives, such as Chinese immigration in Indianapolis and the roles of women in wartime industry. An award-winning scholar, Kelsey has received prestigious honors, including the Walter K. Nugent Best Graduate Student Paper Award and the Dwight L. Smith Award for Excellence in Research and Writing. Beyond her academic research, she is a dedicated leader in the professional community, having spearheaded the Indiana History Collaborative and served on various committees for the Indiana State Library and the Midwest History Association to advocate for the advancement of public history. Welcome, Kelsey.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
It's so great to have you both. I always love reading people's bios because I'm like, man, I'm talking to some really impressive people. It's awesome. I'm so happy to have you both. So let's get into it a little bit. My first question is really for both of you because you both have really unique lenses, either for public history, community development. Your work both highlights the intersection of history and this modern community that we're building. How does understanding a historical presence and the contributions of Asian Americans in the Midwest, especially outside of traditional enclaves like what we see in a Chinatown, directly inform and improve current efforts for this inclusive economic development and civic engagement?
So as I was kind of thinking about this question, I think my biggest takeaway was, looking at Asian American history makes you realize that many of these questions we're facing today regarding citizenship, identity, immigration are not new. And these are actually continuations of conversations that have been happening pretty much since America was founded.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So one thing I was going to say was that studying immigration history really gives us a perspective for the present times. And it shows us that immigrants have been in the U.S. and the Midwest for a really long time, despite xenophobia, despite discrimination, and they've run really successful businesses here for a really long time, and they're probably not going anywhere soon. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, nor should they.
Right. No, I think it's a great conversation to have, especially with everything that's been going on currently, whether if it's a policy related thing or through things that are happening within our community. It's super important to also think about all the communities that are affected in that space. So whether if it's small businesses being affected as well, and then we're also coming from the post-COVID lens, with Asian businesses directly being affected by those circumstances, especially in the Midwest, but also nationwide across the United States. There's a lot of challenges that continues to be current, but at the same time, there is also a lot of things that the United States or within our respective cities are actively doing to continue to support small businesses, but also community-based organizations that are providing direct services that support our communities.
Yeah, man, if there's one thing we can say about Indianapolis is there are so many organizations and nonprofits that have dedicated themselves to lifting up small businesses, especially businesses that are owned by people of color, of immigrants, that make sure that they have the resources that they need. And I think that's a beautiful way to recognize the work that Indianapolis is doing.
Yeah, and can I just jump in real quick?
Please.
One of the things that I'm also really, really passionate about is combating this imagery of Indiana or Indianapolis or even the Midwest as a whole, as like these flyover cities and these flyover states where nothing's happening, there's no diversity, there's no exciting economic developments happening.
Right.
That is how Midwestern and Indiana state history has been written before, and that was definitely the perception. And I feel like in recent years, there's been a new wave of scholarship that's saying, no, actually, Indianapolis is a really globally connected, economic leader that has a lot of diversity and has a lot of diverse businesses. So I feel like looking at the history of those types of people, especially Asian Americans, is important for combating those stereotypes.
Yeah. Makes me think we should rethink that slogan of the crossroads of America.
Yeah.
Like, we're not just here to drive through or to send your trains through.
Right.
My next question is for you, Kelsey. You specialized in understudied narratives like Chinese immigration in Indianapolis. Considering that Chinese immigrants are a relatively small demographic minority in the region, what were the primary and perhaps surprising mechanisms of community formation, mutual support, or business networking that they utilized in the absence of a more large established Chinatown structure?
Yeah. So when I was preparing to do my thesis and I was trying to decide what I wanted to do, I knew I wanted to do Asian American communities, or specifically Chinese communities, because I'm Chinese myself, and an adoptee. And I was looking at all the literature and reading all the books, and I was like, we are missing this whole geographic region of the Midwest. You could read an entire book and you would leave with an impression that there were no Chinese immigrants in Indiana.
Yeah.
Which I knew wasn't true because I was Chinese.
Right. You're like, I'm here.
So on one hand, I was like, this is really missing. And then on the other, I was like, yes, this is the gap I'm looking for in the scholarship that I need for my thesis. So one thing I was noticing when I started digging into Chinese immigration in Indy, that is really different, is that they were spread around the city. There's no like concentrated ethnic enclave. And so you might have some people on Indiana Avenue, then you might have others on Massachusetts Avenue, then you might have some on Delaware Street. And then it's also a really small population. It's about 50 to 100 immigrants at any given point during the 1800s, like 1860s to 1920-ish, just because of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which was a nationwide ban on Chinese immigrants coming to the U.S., unless they were not of the laboring class. So one thing I noticed immediately was that Chinese immigrants were coming here because they're really smart business people.
Yeah.
And they're realizing that there is a gap in service in the Midwest, where if they set up their laundry shops or their restaurants or their Chinese goods stores in Indianapolis, they're not going to have competition. Compared to if they're doing that in San Francisco, they're going to have a lot of competition. Yeah. So they are gradually migrating from the coast Usually they're coming through Chicago, and then they're landing in smaller cities like Indianapolis. And they're mainly coming because they see an economic opportunity. So one thing that's really interesting about that is that these immigrants were more motivated to basically have community buy-in and reach out to traditional Hoosier communities because that was their patrons. Like if they were going to just focus on other Chinese immigrants, they would go out of business. So they were really focused on making lots of friends, ingratiating themselves to the community as much as possible, throwing Chinese cultural events like Chinese New Year's parties, Chinese banquets, and inviting their neighbors who may have never experienced that before, which was really interesting. So it's a different business model than maybe in San Francisco or New York or Los Angeles. And then the other thing is that they are using Chinese culture is what I've seen. They're using Chinese culture to get people into the door. They're like kind of branding themselves as a cultural curio in some ways. And like the restaurants in particular are kind of promising not only food, but also this exotic experience where you feel like you're in China, even though you're in Indy. And that's not something Hoosiers had by the 1860s, 1870s. That was all pretty novel. So, yeah.
Amazing. Well said. That's very fascinating. I'm going to throw it over to you, Ephraim. Your professional focus is on these local initiatives and inclusive development. From a practical standpoint, what would you say specific financial or community development tools like microloans, targeted networking, language access programs do organizations like LISC need to deploy to effectively support these Asian-owned businesses that are dispersed through a metropolitan area rather than concentrated, like Kelsey said, in that one business district?
Right. No, great point. And then, for the company that I work at, which would be easier for you, we say colloquially as LISC.
LISC, I love it.
Yes. So LISC, where I work with, is one of the largest community development financial institutions in the nation. We're present in about more than 30 major cities, and we have national teams that provide services across the United States and its territories.
Amazing.
I've worked at the local office here, LISC Indy, for a couple of years, and then I transferred to the national team that manages rural small business and entrepreneurship work, which allows me to be a part of amazing projects across the United States that support rural entrepreneurs and small businesses, which is amazing at its core, because one of the things that you mentioned, what are the many layers of support that communities need to thrive and be successful? A lot of it is access to credit, right? So, for example, if you are a rising entrepreneur or a small business trying to get their feet up, as well as what do those conversations look like when you are talking to not just traditional banks, but also credit unions. And at the same time, for us, we're a CDFI. So as a community development financial institution, we are uniquely put in this middle ground as a mediator to where we can support small businesses that are having trouble accessing traditional lending, traditional loans from traditional banks as well, and come in and provide products and loan services that allows us to do just that, is fill in that middle ground. So where folks can come in and have those more opportunities in those spaces. But yeah, access to capital is a big thing. I would say digital opportunity, digital adaptation is also a great challenge that not just Asian communities have, or Asian businesses, but all of our communities do. At the same time, is being able to successfully cultivate and create a more physical experience online, and build on that as well, because you see that traditional ready-to-made shipped directly to your address, and even things such as physical storefronts as well. Those are something to think about when it comes to having a successful business, because you may not need a physical storefront. You could even do a pop-up, or you can go through even like a co-working space, an incubator space where you can test, experiment different products, different services, even on a culinary basis, right? Or even for arts and crafts. So there are many ways to do that. It's just a lot of folks can have that information overload or just to overthink about themselves and be like, well, if I don't know, I'm not sure if I can find someone that does know,
Yeah.
whether if it's in the same language, in the same community as well. So part of that work for us is to work with community-based partners as well, nonprofits, government organizations to share with them, and even with banks too. We work closely with banks and their respective foundations to create programs and grant giving opportunities to not just nonprofits and local organizations, but directly to small businesses as well.
Yeah.
So I think those are a couple of things where those frameworks come to mind, those multiple layers of support, is being able for small businesses to find these opportunities that are accessible to them, and then they're also accessible to the language that they also speak at the same time, but also understands the cultural nuances of everything. And also just sharing my own background too. Like, I'm a first generation Filipino American. I'm originally from the Philippines as well. I immigrated here in the early 2000s. I was naturalized a couple of years ago. So it's very interesting to see, just as an immigrant myself, coming into a space. I've lived in multiple states, but I moved here to Indy from Michigan as an Indy transplant about 5 years ago, and really get to see and be connected to just our ecosystem, our community spaces, our cultural districts, seeing the strengths, seeing the opportunities, seeing the gaps, seeing the challenges that are still ongoing. How can I be a part of that? And I would like to say Indy has been truly welcoming in that space. So it's been really great all around.
Yeah, I'm so glad. Thank you for sharing that perspective. I love that. And, for better or worse, it's true. Businesses have to have some kind of online presence to thrive. And I think a lot of them especially saw that during COVID, because people couldn't go to those brick and mortar stores. And even now I find myself, if I can't go to the brick and mortar store, I look up their website to see if I can buy something online. So it is good to have that presence and help people facilitate what that means for them. Yeah. Back over to Kelsey. Can you discuss a little bit, and this plays into your research, your master's thesis, how these Chinese immigrants were utilizing unique business models like the laundry or the restaurant services that you mentioned, or utilized their culture in Indianapolis to contribute to economic stability, cultural preservation of their local community, and for their families abroad?
Yeah, well, to follow up real quick on Ephraim's comments, one thing I really love about having both of us here at the same time is the fact that I'm talking about like the 1800s and the early 1900s.
Yeah.
And then Ephraim's over here talking about like online business models.
Right.
I love like the fact that we're going from past to present. I think that's really cool.
It's awesome.
Also, welcome to Indiana.
Yeah. Happy to have you here.
Thanks for coming away from
You're
the
number
darks.
5.
So,
I mean, Michigan's cool too. Don't get me
Oh,
wrong.
no,
but-
don't
but
get me wrong.
Indiana's cooler, right?
Yeah, of course. It's great. This is my home now.
Yeah.
I'm a Hoosier by choice, Indy resident by choice, and that's only because like the community here has been super welcoming.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I love that.
But yeah, going back to your question about business models.
Yeah.
So the two businesses that I studied pretty heavily in my master's thesis were hand laundries and restaurants. And both of these business models, specifically for the Chinese community, are coming from the West Coast inward. So a lot of them are coming from like San Francisco, then they're going to Chicago and setting up a business, and then maybe finally they're coming to Indy and setting up the business. So these aren't new, but they are new to the city. So I'll start with laundries. These are the businesses that came to Indy first, and this is what most of the early Chinese immigrants in the 1860s, I want to say. I'll have to double check that. But in the mid 1800s are setting up. The main reason they're doing that is because it's cheap and it's what am I trying to say? It's cheap. So they don't need a lot of capital.
Yeah.
So it's just, they need the wash bin, they need the iron, they need some sewing supplies, but otherwise they can do it in a really small space and just live above that business. And they don't necessarily need English fluency to conduct that business. They actually evolved this really, I think, ingenious ticketing system where they can communicate with their customers even if they don't speak very much English.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, because it's not as front facing as other businesses. So, if you can innovate, then
Yeah.
you don't even need to speak English at all.
Absolutely. And so they're using all these tags and all of these systems to attach it to the garment so that they don't get them lost. And usually, and they'll also have the customer actually, they'll just pass it down and they'll have them write their name and whatnot in English. And then that tag's how they identify it. Usually they didn't get lost. Sometimes they did.
That's true of any laundry service.
Yeah. I was reading some great newspaper articles where people were talking to like the Indianapolis Star or the Indianapolis Recorder, and they're complaining that their laundry got lost and they were given someone else's clothes, and they were like, there's no way to rectify this because the business owners don't speak English. So I just have someone else's clothes. But the laundries are really focused on these low prices and high volume. And you'll see these Chinese immigrants working almost nonstop, 6 hours, 6 days a week, 10 to 12 hours, and really doing quite a bit of laundry. It's hard work. It's backbreaking work. There's no laundry machines. So that is what the laundries look like. And they begin to use Chinese culture as a way to get their foot in the door, to get Hoosiers to come in and visit. So one thing that I always find really interesting, and it's like that niche topic I don't know if anyone else cares about, is I'm really into like Chinese laundry signs, because what they would do in Indy and other places is they would put their name in Chinese characters and in Chinese, and then underneath in English they would put laundry. Now, obviously they know that no Hoosier walking by knows exactly what those Chinese characters mean.
Right.
But they know what laundry means. So it's an intentional choice to use a language that they had never seen before to get people to come in because they're curious. And the I want to say it was the Indianapolis News. They actually used, they had a reporter who went in and he was asking the Chinese laundries, what do the characters mean? Can you recreate this? How do you say laundry in Chinese? So that, I think that curiosity worked.
Yeah.
So you're seeing them start to do that. And then you see the restaurants really lean into that and using Chinese culture as a way to attract business. So restaurants came a little later. And unlike laundries, they were run by people who usually could speak English, were pretty highly educated, and also fairly wealthy. Because if you compare how much it takes to open a laundry versus how much capital it takes to open a restaurant, that was a really big difference. And of course, you can't necessarily do a ticketing system. You have to speak at least a little English.
I suppose.
Yes, to take orders, cook, all that type of stuff. And so since these Chinese restaurateurs can speak English, you'll see them really leaning heavily in this. Like, for example, Moi Ki, who was a very prominent Chinese immigrant and restaurateur in the city, he's doing all these cool banquets, he's throwing Chinese New Year's parties, and he's inviting really big figures like Mayor Holtzman or the county commissioner, or he even hosted Senator Fairbanks here once. And that is all seen as kind of a way to use Chinese food and to gain protection for the Chinese community in the area, and also to bring people in, right?
Yeah.
So they kind of have to walk this tightrope where they're bouncing, emphasizing being Chinese and being an authentic experience and being kind of maybe a little exotic is how you would put it.
Yeah.
With also appearing American enough that they're not going to be a threat to the community. So they're bouncing this really tight line of trying not to go too far one way or too far the other. I don't want to be too Chinese, but I also don't want to be too American, right? Yeah. And then the other thing I think that is really interesting is that you see a lot of these dishes get Americanized over the period. So a lot of the traditional cooking techniques, the ingredients are coming from China. And then these Midwestern restaurants, these West Coast restaurants, all of them really are really starting to incorporate things like sweet corn, and they're stir frying it, which I think is really, really interesting. So sociologists kind of talk about this negotiated authenticity, where it's fairly authentic, but it's also getting modified in a lot of ways.
Because of what's available, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. So you see that a lot, and it's interesting because like you'll go into a Chinese restaurant today and things like Kung Pao chicken, for example, aren't necessarily from China,
Right.
but they're marketed as a Chinese product.
Yeah.
So I'll stop there, but it's really interesting.
Yeah. And kind of along the same vein, but a follow-up, can you discuss a little bit the role of Chinese women in the city once they were able to be there?
Yes. So one thing to note is that the first wave of Chinese immigrants here is overwhelmingly going to be young men, often single. And a big reason for this is because in 1875, the U.S. passed what's called the Page Act. And that effectively banned all Chinese women from entering the states under the assumption that they were prostitutes. So there's a lot of racial prejudices going on. There's a lot of xenophobia. But basically, women couldn't immigrate, which obviously is devastating for these men who can't start families, who aren't finding wives, or they can't bring their family from China to America.
Yeah.
So a lot of times they're really separated by the Pacific Ocean. So that leads to a major imbalance in gender in Chinese immigrant communities, including ND. But I did look at a few women who did immigrate here. One of the things I'd like to do in the future is look at more immigration and what the Chinese immigrant experience looked like from the female perspective.
Yeah.
But two prominent people I think would be interesting is one is Sue C. She is the daughter of a Chinese Chicago merchant named H. Sling. And that is the reason she's in America, is because she's actually born here. And she marries Indianapolis laundryman E. Lung in 1905 and moves from Chicago to Indy to be with him. They actually have two children here, Rosa Chen and Newton Cass Chen,
Awesome.
which is really cute. Those are some of the first, and this is a place I'd like to explore too, is these are some of the first Chinese children who grow up in the city.
Wow.
And one story that I read that I found really, really powerful is E. Lung and Sue C. have these baptismal christenings for their children. So they're inviting 50 plus people, including the mayor, the county prosecutor, all these very powerful people, and they're hosting this very lavish banquet. And during this period, they have this petition they sign, and all the people who are the guests there are signing this petition that affirms that they know these children were born in the U.S. and therefore are entitled to citizenship.
Really
and
smart.
they're not transplants during this exclusionary period because they're thinking
That's some forward thinking.
that they're, that's going to be questioned at some point.
Right.
So I thought that was a really powerful story.
Yeah.
And then the other very prominent Chinese woman in Indy during these times would be Chen Feng. And she is the wife of Moy Ki. So they have this almost kind of romantic, like very transnational court system where courtship, that's what I'm trying to say, where he is writing letters to her in China. They're getting to know each other. And then eventually he goes back to China for a visit and he marries her and brings her back to Indy. And she's really active with helping hire and oversee servers. She is hosting people. She is serving people. And also she, as an indication of her social status, has the traditional bound feet. So there were even newspaper ads where Moy was advertising that his wife would be serving you and you could come and you could see her bound feet.
Interesting.
Which is another example of that culture being used to get people in the door.
Yeah.
So she was really vital. And so I think being a Chinese woman in Indianapolis during exclusion has a lot of layers because these women are navigating both U.S. and Chinese patriarchal systems, being a minority immigrant, and also language barriers. So I think there's a lot to go on there. And I'd love to look into Chinese women more and what those experiences are like.
Yeah.
So
thank you. That's really fascinating. And I'd love to read some of your work on deep diving into that because I feel like it's just not something that is talked about enough, focused on enough. There's obviously, in public school. We're just not learning some of these things. So it should absolutely be it's the part of the fabric of our community.
Yeah. And then also on the economic side, one thing I did pull, I still want to pull some more numbers, but I was looking at numbers specifically of how many remittances or money Chinese immigrants here in Indy were sending home to their families in China to support them.
Yeah.
So the Indianapolis News noted, and I quote, one Indianapolis bank alone has, during the last 6 months, received an exchange on $12,000 sent home by Chinamen in the city. It is estimated that those who do business with the Chinamen, that's their words, not mine, by the way, that not less than $15,000 is annually sent from Indianapolis to China. Adjusted for inflation, I did the math, $15,000 in 1889 is almost $500,000. It's over $500,000, actually.
Whoa.
In 2025.
So it was not that long ago.
Yeah. So even though there's less than 100 Chinese immigrants here, I mean, they are doing very well, and a lot of money's being exchanged.
Yeah.
So.
They probably were not thinking about that when they didn't allow their families to come with them.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a lot of money. Throwing it back to you, Ephraim, when a demographic minority is numerically small, geographically dispersed, like we saw, what are some of the biggest challenges and also most effective strategies for increasing civic participation and a political voice? How do you leverage business successes or community institutions to drive greater policy representation?
Well, I mean, I think first off, you heard a lot about the history about Asian communities here, especially for the Chinese community here. They've been here for decades.
Yeah.
They're a part of Indiana history, just like Filipino Americans have been here for centuries as well, and they're part of American history at the same time. So it's almost like we're still trying to build awareness to show that history is still Indiana history.
Yeah.
And that's history that we should all be proud of as well, because that's part of that Hoosier identity. At the same time, that's what makes Indiana,
right,
too. At the same time, is having all of these different communities come in, bring their respective identities, but then cater and build something that's unique for this state, for this city, as well, is a big thing. And Moiki was one of those civic leaders at the very beginning. He really set that precedent for an Asian civic leader to not be afraid, to be comfortable and confident in networking and putting himself out there, being able to build himself up, and at the same time even engage in international relations too, because he also even invited the Chinese royal family to visit Indiana too for the first time. So it was like one of those things where it shows that we've all lived a very lasting imprint to this space. And then on the wider scale as well, the top 3 Asian communities here, just by population, by census, right, would be Chinese, Indian, and Filipino. But then you have a growing community of Burmese, especially on the south side of Indy. So I got to give a shout out to my Burmese community here. And at the same time, we have a growing Afghan community. Each of these communities now have their own respective community centers. Community organizations here that actively provide services and promote education and outreach for all Indiana residents, just to see and look and be educated about that, and show that these are going to be Hoosiers. These are Indy residents. Like, these are folks that are going to be just walking down the street, going to coffee shops, like doing, working their 9 to 5s, doing all these things. And I think that's an important thing, because we only represent, I believe, a 6% of the population right now for Indiana. And a smaller portion of that are in, influential positions in government. Only a few of them are elected officials.
Yeah.
I believe it's only 1 or 2 of them at the same time that are elected. And it's definitely something to really address and think about, because especially in central Indiana, where there is the largest and growing and fastest growing Asian population here, it's really important to connect all of our communities together and show and promote civic participation, civic engagement to them, that this is an important aspect to build your own influence, not just as a community, but as yourself.
Right.
Like, because, for example, unfortunately, Indiana still has that distinction of having like the lowest voter turnouts, right?
Yeah.
Lowest civic engagement at the federal level as well. And that's, that is an unfortunate thing that Indiana continues to rank low on.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest things that I'm happy to be a part of is, being a part of the Asian Pacific American Public Affairs Association, and the acronym is easier. It's APAPA. So
I love these.
There's a lot of abbreviations to the work that I'm a part in. So hopefully that's helpful. So being a part of the APAPA Indiana chapter, last year we recently launched the Key Leadership Program, and the key part came from Moy Key. We were inspired by Moy Key.
Yeah.
We couldn't say Key with the family name and such because we couldn't trademark that.
Sure.
But we just translated to Key as in Key.
Yeah.
Because that we believe civic engagement is a key aspect in building a life here in Indiana, building a professional and personal network here in Indiana. All revolves around, I believe, civic engagement in that space. Because when I pitched that program last year and when we ran with it, a lot of it came from my own personal experience as a first-gen immigrant Asian Hoosier that came here, and not being able to find an Asian mentor, not being able to find folks that look like me, speak the same language as me. At the same time, aside from English, I speak Tagalog.
Yeah.
And it didn't take, it ended up me being able to still build a network and a professional network here. But I started thinking, well, I don't want that to be hard for all transplants that look like me to come here.
Yeah.
I want people to feel connected. I want people to be part of a community here. And I was actually inspired by all of our other communities here with their own respective leadership programs. Like, for example, the Indianapolis Urban League has the Exchange. Axis is the Latino leadership program that is run by our Latino organizations here at the same time. And I have friends in both of these programs that graduated from these programs, that ran these programs. And I was just thinking, I'm like, well, we got to do something for our community. And then I was like, well, if no one could do it, I guess that's something that we can all do, and I can start something like that, and maybe people can come in and pitch. So, Ariana has been a great advocate for that.
Yeah.
She's part of this meaningful work, so hats off to her, continuing being a great advocate and a steering committee member of this work. But it's very historic for us because even what I feel through the first conversations that I believe Moy Key had decades ago about building a more engaged Asian society here in Indy and in Indiana came from now this byproduct of a initiative to bring other Asians together and get engaged. So being able to educate and bring resources on serving on nonprofit boards, being able to serve in public commissions and boards on the city level, so city boards, state boards, being able to be appointed by the mayor to get into those boards or by appointed by city county officials. And that's something that I know specifically because I had the privilege to be appointed by Mayor Joe Hogsett to a city board about 2 years ago. And because of that experience, I was like, well, I want to see more Asians. I want to see more people that look like me be involved in these spaces because a lot of times it's like older folks that are more into their careers, or they are semi-retired, or they're transitioning.
They have more time to do it
as well. They got more time to do it, but I'm just like, well, you don't necessarily need a lot of time to commit. You could be strategic with your time, and with the time that you can strategically commit to, I think you would be a great candidate for some of these boards. And with our relationships with city government on the state side as well, that's where it allows us to really put these participants, put these working professionals in front of folks, in front of elected officials, in front of community leaders as well, and say like, hey, there's a group of folks that are change makers, that want to be connected to their community, but also want to be the best advocates for themselves.
Yeah.
And I think we did a great job now that we're entering year 2, and we're going to have the second class of the Key Leadership Program. And I believe that's like a big hats off to everybody involved, especially for creating Indiana's first civic leadership program for Asian professionals.
Yeah, that's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And our hope, as you mentioned, Ariana's an amazing advocate. She's half Filipino herself, so that community is very important to her. And our hope in having these kinds of conversations and inviting both of you onto the podcast is that other people are seeing this, they're seeing the representation that they may not see every single day, and maybe they're inspired to go out and serve on a board or even vote in their local elections, which is so important. Please go vote.
Please go vote and register to vote.
Yes, register first. Yeah. Now, the last question that I'm going to throw is for both of you. And this conversation aims to discuss financial and economic growth factors that metropolitan areas like Indianapolis experience from supporting Asian-owned businesses. Beyond the direct jobs that they create, what are the less visible but equally vital economic contributions that these businesses, especially a non-traditional neighborhood-based operation like laundries or smaller restaurants, how do they contribute to the local ecosystem of a city like Indianapolis? What does that impact look like?
In response to that, I really try to argue in my master's thesis that these Chinese businessmen and women were really these cultural emissaries or cultural pioneers to the city. So they're some of the first people who, through their businesses, are exposing the traditional Hoosier community to Chinese language, Chinese culture, Chinese dress, Chinese food. And they're really the first ambassadors from that country to be here. So I would argue that these businesses are having a major cultural impact. And I would also argue that, so some context here is during the 1840s onward, there's this big thing that we call the Chinese question, which is these debates about what we do with Chinese immigration policy. And there's a lot of people who don't think that Chinese immigrants can be Americanized at all, or Americanized isn't the right word, but that they can't be American, that they can't assimilate, that they're too different.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're saying during this time that there has to be a melting pot, that we have to all assimilate. And so I think that is another big thing, is that these Chinese immigrants are shaping Hoosier attitudes to this big political question and this big political debate.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm seeing is, because they're making so many inroads with traditional Hoosiers, Hoosier attitudes towards Chinese immigration in the 1800s do look a little different. They're not as concerned about the economics, mainly because there's not enough Chinese to be worried about, all these people are going to take my job. You have 40 to 100. It's like, okay, they're not taking my job. It's pretty safe.
Yeah.
A great example of this is, let's see, during the 1870s, the Senate is conducting this congressional investigation on Chinese immigration in San Francisco. And our Indiana Civil War governor, Oliver P. Morton, is actually on that investigative committee. And he writes the minority report arguing that we should allow Chinese immigration, and that to exclude them would be to violate he's part of the Republican Party, these Republican ideals of egalitarianism and equality that they had just fought the Civil War for. So, you do see a different and maybe a distinctly Hoosier answer to this Chinese question that's going on in the nation. And I think the actions of the immigrants are really central to how this question is formed in other Hoosiers' minds. The other thing I wanted to point out is I really love that Key is a wordplay on Moiki.
Yeah.
And I did not realize that until now. I don't know if you can cook, Ephraim, but, I feel like some of your involvement with, like, the boards and the committees and political activism and making sure that there's a pathway for new immigrants is really similar to the story of Moiki.
Right.
He's doing a lot of that too. And here we are, almost a century later, still doing it. So.
Yeah. And like you mentioned earlier in the show, immigration is still a big topic, a big question, something we're still fighting about. So studying that history and realizing that, like you said, 100 years later, we're still asking those questions and there's still xenophobia that exists in the country. Like, hopefully that opens people's eyes. Like, we have not come as far as we like to think that we have. Yeah.
And I just think it's really interesting, and I love the parallels between them. And then I also love the fact that during this time when so many people don't even think Chinese people can be Americans or should even be let in the country, Moy is really expressing this, no, I am American. I'm a Chinese American. I can do both, which I think is a conversation a lot of Asian immigrants still have today of we can be both. We can be Chinese and we can be American, and we can be equally rooted in both cultures. So
yeah, and it's hard, right? Because it's that perpetual like foreigner, I would say perspective or fear. I would say the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
I would say continues to be a conversation as well that always comes up, and it becomes less and less, I believe, when you see more and more people that look like me but are also involved in all these great things in the community as well, because then you'll see the community come up and support them in times of need as well, because you saw the things that happen, like for example in Minneapolis as well, when you see all these things that are happening in a violent manner, you see communities come up that are affected, like being able to come in, and where if it's a local Vietnamese store or a Thai restaurant as well that's under attack, but then you see the community come in and be like, oh no, she's been here for decades.
Yeah, those are our friends and neighbors.
Yeah, that's our friends and neighbors and such. Like they were here from the beginning. They've always opened their doors. They're always friendly. They're always, doing all these things.
Right.
You'll see those things reoccur. And I would say that's the bright light that's being shined, where you see all these things that are happening across the United States. You see the response, right?
Yeah.
You see the response of a community that comes up and supports their community because that's part of them, right? They don't view it as something external or something foreign.
Right.
Right. It's like, no, that is a community member that I have to support.
Yeah. We were talking a little bit in a previous episode about how important it is to use your privilege. And I think we saw that especially in Minneapolis, that people who had the capability, who had some, they had their white privilege that they could use to protect their friends and neighbors. They were stepping up and they were doing that and they were fighting back. Yeah.
Right. And just to add on too, on the larger ecosystem, especially going back to small business support too, I think that adds more when the community rises up and support one another. That also affects politics on a local level, starting from city, county to state, all the way to the federal level.
Yeah.
Too, at the same time, where you can see a more folks coming in, talking to their elected officials, saying like, hey, my neighbor is struggling with this, or even they themselves that are affected have the confidence and knowing their right to talk to an elected official and share their piece and share their testimony. I tell participants all the time, and folks, just like, the biggest story that you can share to an elected official is your own personal testimony.
Yeah.
And then bonus points, especially if it's within your district, it's within that person, that elected official community.
I'm your constituent.
Yeah,
I'm voting
your
for you.
constituent. Yeah. Like I'm, and like I said, like at the end of the day, when someone gets elected into office, I also tell folks too, is like, now they represent an office that provides services to that district. It's not about a particular party anymore. It's about their office providing services. Now it's also up to you as as a resident, citizen, or even as an advocate as well, if you are in that area, is to come in and being able to have those honest conversations and being able to be a part of those things, because all of the things that affect small businesses and even nonprofits or community-based work, a lot of that draws down to the local and state level in government at the same time. So being able to be aware of that and at the same time know that you have it within yourself to go in, and you don't have to do it alone. You go in with others as well, and you'll be surprised on what the conversations can be. One thing too, because being a board member of Immigrant Welcome Center, which is one of the great nonprofits here in Indianapolis that provides services to immigrant communities, is when it comes to advocating for immigrant services or access to immigrant services, we also advocate those needs to elected officials on the state house. So whenever the state house is in session, the organization provides opportunities where they can extend conversations and educate state senators, state representatives as well on just general matters of immigration, but also the economic impact that immigrants have in Indiana communities. And we see a lot of success, and we also see a lot of work that continues that needs to be done because of that.
Yeah, well said. Well, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
But I totally agree with Ephraim. I think, as a Chinese adoptee who was living in a transracial family, so my parents are white, there were so many experiences where I was going through school or class or college or in my workplace, and I'm the only Asian person there, much less Chinese person.
Yeah.
So having these spaces where we can meet and connect, I think are really, really key. And then in terms of the activism,
there it is again.
See, Moy Key is the center of this all, really.
Truly. Might as well title the whole episode after him, too.
But when Ephraim's making these conversations about pathways and advocacy and being visible for other people who might not know we're also here, we're doing great work, or are feeling small, I think that's so key. And bringing this back to like the history side of this, Moy Key had worked really, really hard. He was ingratiated with Mayor Shanks, all these political figures. He meets Teddy Roosevelt at one point, which is really, really cool.
Okay.
And he works really hard to make these inroads with the traditional community. And I don't know if he would have called it advocacy. I think he would maybe say hustling or something. But when the federal government does come in and say, actually, Moy, your citizenship isn't valid, you're not an American citizen, Mayor, I want to say, let me double check. It is Mayor Shanks. He writes a personal letter to President Taft and says, that Moy is universally regarded as being one of the city's best citizens and to not revoke his citizenship, and the community really rallies around him because he had done this advocacy, because he had made these inroads. He ultimately does lose his citizenship, but I try to argue that he's still an acting citizen despite the formal declaration.
Yeah.
And that's how he is for the next decade plus that he lives in Indy and continues to run his restaurant. But just like, it was important for Moy to do it, and I think it's important now to do it. And I think Ephraim's absolutely right about all of that. So, yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for coming here, for sharing your expertise, your stories, your research, talking about the impact on our community and beyond. I think advocacy is so important. You both show why it's so important to continue to learn what you can, speak up when you can. So thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you guys for listening, for being part of our show this week. Hopefully you will come back for our next Let's Talk More on Monday. Make sure to join us over on Patreon for our masterclass series and our founder series, and pick up your copy of issue 12 Cerebral if you haven't yet. It turned out to be a pretty great piece. So we will see you next time. Bye, guys.